Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Discourse Education Podcast. My name is Chang, and I'm the teacher for General Paper, H2 History, and I guess, O-Levels English for, our tuition center here at the Discourse Education. And yeah, this week's the big one, right? We are gonna cover the 2024 budget statement by DPM Lawrence Wong. In a speech that he gave on 16th of February. It took us a week essentially to write up all the things that we need to write up, and even then we are not done yet, in order to talk more about this topic. So just a reminder that this podcast is, targeted towards students taking the A-levels general paper or H2 history, right? Students taking the A-levels in Singapore, or even if, let's say, you are interested in current affairs and you would like to write, all these things as examples in your O-levels English argumentative essays, you're welcome to watch this, although this particular video is going to be quite technical. And nevertheless, if there are international friends joining us, welcome, alright? Yeah, and we've made some hardware upgrades. I invested in a 1080p camera, quite a cheap one, it's the Logitech C922, and got some colored lighting, pretty cool stuff, and yeah. So in this part of the overall budget, statement analysis, right? Because I think we are gonna split that into, I think, at least 3 videos. There's just way too much to cover. Okay, but today what we are gonna talk about, or at least in this particular video, is we are gonna summarize the aims of the budget 2024. And we are going to focus on the economic policies that were announced, all the adjustments and all that were announced within this budget statement and this speech as well. And what we are going to do is we are going to break them down exhaustively, or at least as far as my ability goes. We are going to look at it from the general paper, H1 and H2 economics, and even the H2 history perspectives. So the idea essentially is that in analyzing this whole budget statement, the hope is that you'll be able to use all these things as examples. This is the largest video that we have done to date. I'm also currently working on an op-ed, right, in video form, or as YouTubers would call it, video essays, right? But yeah, I hope this particular episode will be useful for you. So yeah, I've had 3 coffees, super wired, right, roaring to go. Okay, and here we go. So just a quick reminder though that I would highly recommend that you go and either, watch the budget statement, on CNA or gov.sg YouTube channels, or, read the budget statement in full, right? Because that really provides all the things that Lawrence Wong, announced and all the necessary context that come with it, right? But nevertheless, if you have yet to do so, we are going to break it down exhaustively anyway, or at least the speech exhaustively. So yeah, alright, so the budget 2024 analysis. Okay, I am thinking of putting these slides in a downloadable place, probably on Google Drive. I would probably link that there in the video description. Alright, so here we go. Okay, so first, I think it would help to have a summary of what all the budget 2024 aims were. Okay, and essentially, right, if you have read the whole budget statement, this is how they segmented all their thoughts, right? Or specifically how Lawrence Wong, segmented all his thoughts over here and all the policy measures, right? So First things first, obviously, is the immediate fiscal support. So we are referring to government spending to help Singaporeans. Pursuing economic growth. So this is more of a long-term view, right, in terms of how we can affect economic growth in this country. Sustaining financial security. So we are looking at, all the one. I guess this is related to the previous point, but in essence, ensuring that, Singapore would remain competitive as an economy, so on and so forth. And then, of course, all the other social policies, right? So things related to lifelong learning, dealing with inequality, supporting families, the retired, enhancing national security, and of course, building national unity as a whole. So these are all a summary of the aims, all right? And we are gonna go into the breakdown here, okay? All right, so first, we want to look at all the immediate measures that are implemented. Okay, and why did the government package this as immediate measures? Because essentially they're going to do this immediately. Okay, so there are two main points here. All right, the first being the assurance package, and the second being the enterprise support package, and of course other ancillary details, right? But essentially we are looking at direct monetary disbursements. That means, the government making it rain, giving money directly to the people. So the summary of the assurance package is this, okay? It is a package that's worth 1.9 billion Sing dollars, all right? And the details here are that Singaporean households in general will get an additional $600 in CDC vouchers. All right. So in case you are wondering what the CDC vouchers are, they are vouchers. It's as simple as that, and you can use them in participating merchants. Right. So most commonly, obviously, in our food centers, or to call them colloquially, in our kopitiams. All right. And you can use them to purchase, your everyday meals and all that. And it also consists of vouchers for groceries. So that, in short, is giving money to people directly so that they can spend on food, drinks, groceries. Okay? Costs of living ang pao between $200 and $400 for adults with accessible income of up to $100,000. Okay, so this, as its name suggests, okay, the government didn't call it an ang pao, by the way. The government just called it a payment, right? Adults just straight up get this amount, between $200 to $400. Obviously, only for adults with accessible income of up to 100,000. That means, right, that it's reserved for adults who earn less than this amount in a year. Okay, or at least that's the gist of it. There are a lot of technical details behind the term accessible income, right, because it entails a total income minus all the deductibles. But yeah, we don't really need to go too much into that. Okay, and of course, for those who do not own more than one property, all right, U-Save rebates up to $950. If in case you're wondering what the U-Save rebates are, they are essentially cash payments to allow, or rather, they are cash payments for Singaporean households to pay for their utilities, right? So your water and electricity, okay? So up to $1,000 is almost $1,000, right? In financial year 2024. So that will be April 1st, 2024 to March 31st in 2025. And finally, 4 months worth of service and conservancy charge rebate. So what is this? Essentially, how your trash is being cleared every day, right? And also the things like if you have to remove large articles of furniture, you can call this particular free removal number. Of course, they only allow it, like, I guess about twice every quarter, I think. But yeah, that's what the service and conservancy charges are. all right? And this 4 months worth of rebates means, the total amount of money that's given out will be worth about 4 months of all these charges. So that's the summary of the assurance package here, i.e. what the government is going to spend, right? Using this $1.9 billion to help, Singaporeans allay all these costs or alleviate all these costs of, living essentially, all right? Of course, the next one is a top up of the GST voucher fund, okay? So the government is going to, top up, I guess, an additional $6 billion into the GST voucher fund. So in case you're wondering what this is, essentially it's as you can see there, it's a scheme introduced in 2012 to allay costs for lower to middle income families in Singapore, right? And they support Singaporeans in 4 ways: through direct cash payments, MediSave, usually reserved for the elderly only, USave for utilities, as I said earlier, and again, all your service and conservancy charges. Now, the thing is that there are specific criteria, for you to be able to be eligible for the GST voucher payouts, right? So for example, as you can see here, right, one of it is if let's say you want to get cash payments from this particular fund, you have to be above 21 years old, have an accessible income of not more than $34,000 in 2021, and this was the eligibility criteria for 2023. Annual value of your home address in your IC must not exceed $21,000. So you might be wondering what the annual value is. Okay, the annual value essentially refers to an estimation, okay, an estimation of the total amount of rental income that you may get if you were to rent out this particular property. Right? So if let's say you have you own a 3-room flat, okay? 3-room flat, all right? And if let's say, okay, obviously the government has, surveyors to go and more or less estimate this amount. I almost say guesstimate, that's the wrong term. So if they estimate that, your 3-room flat, depending on its location, its age, term, lease term and all that, and everything essentially, it might be worth about, let's say 2.4k a month, right? The total annual value would be 12 times 2.4. You do the math. I failed math in JC, so yeah. Alright, so if you want to find out more about the GST voucher fund, okay, download these slides and access all these links here. Alright, don't worry, these are not like phishing links or whatever. They are all linked to legit government websites. Okay, so that's the second bit of the immediate measures, and the third one is enterprise support package. So what is this? This is worth $1.3 billion, 50% corporate tax rebates. Wow, all the companies must be like, whoa, very happy about all this. Okay, so corporate tax rebates in year of assessment 2024. That means, right, they will enjoy these tax rebates for the taxes that they would have to pay on their profits from 2023, or to be more specific, financial year 2023. So that means April 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. Okay. However, this is capped at 40,000 because obviously you wouldn't want all the big companies to, or rather you wouldn't want to give a 50% rebate to all the big highly profitable companies, right? And there's an enhancement of enterprise financing scheme. Okay, what is this? Essentially, the maximum working capital loan quantum will be permanently raised to $500,000. Now, there are some terms here that we need to understand. Okay, first of all, it's what the hell is a maximum loan quantum? In short, it refers to the maximum amount of money that enterprises are able to borrow. Obviously, depending on the type of loans that they take, and of course depending on the company itself, right, how much liabilities it has, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's for the bankers to decide. Each company has, they can borrow a certain amount of money, certainly, but the idea here is that for working capital, okay, or rather for working capital loans, right, companies will be able to borrow up to $500,000. And of course, you might be wondering what's working capital. It essentially just means current assets minus current liabilities. What does that mean? To put it in very simple terms, that means that it is money that is used to run the everyday operations of the company. That's in very, very simple terms. Okay? In short, what we are looking at here, alright? Oops, sorry, my phone rang. Right, it's on silent mode now. Sorry about that. Okay, so what was I saying? Yeah, so essentially think of working capital as, the short-term financial resources that a company has, to maintain their day-to-day operations, alright? So again, if you want to read up more on this, I would, highly recommend that you do, alright? So you can find out, in greater detail some of the ways that the government, might be trying to support, enterprises in Singapore. And of course, extension of SkillsFuture Enterprise Credit, alright? You all should know what SkillsFuture is, but in case you don't know what that is, it is a policy that was introduced in 2015, alright? And that is I guess a cash top-up, although you can't use it for other things, alright, but it is a cash top-up for Singaporeans, so that they can use that money to spend it on certain causes for upgrading, so upgrade their skills or what have you. So for instance, I myself, I used my SkillsFuture credits around 2020, I guess. Yeah, I used it for a course on SEO, I think. Yeah, so search engine optimization and all that. So yeah, that's what this is. Okay, so this essentially are all, this is all of the, or these are all of the immediate measures, all right, or at least that are stated within the budget statement in itself. Okay, so now we can look at the immediate measures, right? In terms of the analysis, from a GP perspective. Okay, so in short, what we are looking at here are all the potential explanations that you can use in your GP essays. So if we look at it from a political standpoint, right? The framework that we have here is that governments are meant to take care of the citizens' well-being and to deal with short and long-term problems. And clearly you can see that, happening, right? At least for all these immediate measures. So the government is making use of fiscal policy, i.e. government spending, to help alleviate short-term costs of living, right? And on the company side, as you can see here, to alleviate all the short-term costs that can be incurred. Okay, and of course, yeah, the package is definitely directed more towards your middle and lower income families, so there's greater equity there. All right, and from an economic perspective, in this case we are talking about economic perspective, but in the context of GP. All right, just to be clear, when a government spends money, okay, to ensure that their citizens get more cash to deal with their costs of living, those are called transfer payments. Okay, so what we can see here is that is essentially the dynamics of the relationship between the government and private businesses in Singapore, right? In that the government is trying to create an environment that is very conducive for certain business activities and further economic activities. Of course, As you can see here, part of fulfilling the welfare of citizens is ensuring economic stability and job creation. So in supporting the firms can ensure their sustainability, and then they can hire people and people will have jobs, right? So yeah, of course, if we look at it from the AQ perspective here, what we are looking at here is that why is it that the Singapore government has to implement all these things? Because, well, one of our characteristics as a society is that we are an open economy. So what that means is that our society is highly vulnerable to global economic fluctuations, which is what is happening at the moment. And that would in turn make sure, or rather that would compel the government to take actions to create some semblance of stability so that businesses can continue to operate and citizens can citizens are able to deal with all these vicissitudes within the global economy itself, right? And as you can see here, that would in turn instill a lot of confidence in the Singaporean economy. Okay, so that's the GP analysis here for all the immediate measures. No H2 history analysis for this because, well, I mean, nothing really much we can mine there for this particular portion of the budget speech. But from an economics perspective, so now we are talking about now we are analyzing within the context of the subject of H1 and H2 economics, alright? So the reason why I'm talking about this, even though I don't teach this particular subject, is because we did a poll on our Telegram channel, and I think 2/3 of the respondents said yes, they would like to see a H1 and H2 econs analysis. So here we are, right? And I guess that's why it took us so long, or when I say us, it's just me. I guess that's why it took me so long to do this as well, because I had to go and refresh all my, economics concepts. But here we go. So I think in order to best understand the economic impacts of all these measures, right, is to first understand the macroeconomic context. And I'm not even talking about the Singaporean economy as a whole. I'm talking about the global economy. So there's quite a bit of interdisciplinary work occurring here because, it's a cross between general paper and H2 econs, in that you need to know all the context of the current affairs, right? So in this particular case, the macroeconomic context is that we are, by we I mean the entire world, we are facing cost push inflation at the moment. Okay, I should have mentioned this first. The analysis here for H2 econs is on the basis that you know the definitions of all the jargons. So if you don't, go and revise them. Yeah, all right. So to continue, okay, we are facing cost push inflation from a couple of sources. All right. Number one, the global supply shocks from the Russian-Ukraine war. So why did Russia invade Ukraine? That's where we delve into GP territory already, so I don't really want to expound too much on that at the moment. But in short, geopolitics. All right, go and look up, go and read credible sources on that. Okay, but the economic impact of that particular conflict, which unfortunately is still going on right now, is that Russia and Ukraine are suppliers of primary goods. So to be more specific, Russia is a major supplier of oil, gas, natural gas, and certain various metals, whereas Ukraine is a supplier of wheat and corn. So they are major suppliers in the global supply chain. Now, here's the thing, all right? We cannot look at it from a perspective of having substitutes. Because yes, you may argue, if their supply decreases, why not we turn to other substitutes? In this case, I'm not talking about substitutes of the goods itself. I'm talking about substitutes of the suppliers, right? And get them to increase their supply? It's not that simple, because number one, obviously when the war occurred, the quantity supply of all these goods immediately just stopped straight away from these two economies. Number two, other nations that supply oil, gas, various metals, wheat and corn may not necessarily have the capacity to ramp up production. So not only that, these are demand inelastic goods, right? So what that means in short is that when quantity supplied of all these primary goods, decrease, okay, ceteris paribus, that will lead to a surge in prices, because these are demand inelastic products, right? So the changes in prices is not going to affect the quantity demanded as much. So that's reason number one, because we are talking about all these primary goods having their quantity supply decreased, right? And when we say primary goods, they are raw materials that are used in the production of higher value tier 1 manufacturing goods and all that, right? Or in the case of wheat and corn is related to agriculture, so that would have a knock-on impact on all the prices of your food products as a whole. Okay, because we need to keep in mind that all these things are not just related to so we talk about wheat and corn, for instance, is not just the knock-on effect on the prices of all these grains. It is also a knock-on effect on protein as well, because let's say for instance, right, the poultry, so chickens, okay, they eat all these things. Chicken feed comes from wheat and corn. So if the prices of those increase, the cost of production for the rearing of chickens increase, and then of course everything else increases as well. Okay, so that's number one. In the context of Singapore, right, the second reason why there's a cost push inflation is because of the increases to the GST. So what this means is that there is greater deadweight taxation loss, because now, as you know, more people have to pay higher taxes, so then they have less disposable income, right? And less disposable income means overall overall consumption will decrease, which also means the government revenues will decrease as well. Okay. Number two, okay, in terms of the macroeconomic context, there's just a lot of uncertainty in the global economy, and this stems from geopolitical conflicts, right? So we have already covered this in previous videos, things like Israel and Hamas, things like Russia, Ukraine, and of course more recently the rebels in the Houthis rebels, right, in the Red Sea. Their attacks on all the shipping, supply ships, right, is also causing disruptions in the global supply chain. So more and more, right, the world is becoming dangerous, because the whole system, right, that was in place for decades, that essentially created this implicit understanding that country to country conflicts would cease, that illusion was shattered in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. That's why it's such a significant event in current affairs, right? But what that also means is that since there's a lot of uncertainty, okay, then the overall confidence would lower. So investment amounts may decrease, okay? Of course, it is on a case-by-case basis. And of course, risk-taking behaviors tend to be more mitigated as a result, right? Assuming that, the economic agents are rational actors, okay? So the overall impact on aggregate demand as a whole, you have consumption dropping because of cost push inflation, right? And then investments dropping slightly because of wavering confidence. So lowered consumption typically, assuming that everything else stays the same, ceteris paribus, right? Exports will also decrease, So that's why government spending has to go up. Okay, that's why government spending has to go up. That's the context, right? So that's why when the government introduces all these immediate measures in the budget, okay, we can look at it, or rather, let me rephrase that. We tend to think of fiscal policy as purely in macroeconomic terms because that's the way that you were taught. But to really do well for econs, ultimately you also need to understand the impacts of all these machinations on microeconomics as well, right? So that's why over here we are looking at it from a microeconomic perspective. For consumers, okay, consumers would benefit from the managed costs because we are talking about, you know, all the corporate tax rebates, right? So as I said earlier, that would reduce the impact of inflation on firms and help them manage their costs. And the problem is that inflation is causing the increase of both fixed and variable costs. Why both fixed and variable costs? Okay, because in short, as you know, examples of fixed costs include things like, you know, rental, utilities, and all that. Okay, but all these things are increasing, right? We never really talked about it yet in this particular video, but I did mention it in a previous video. Commercial rental rates are increasing. Okay, utilities costs are increasing, you know, because of all the cost push inflation that I talked about earlier, right? And we will talk about this when we cover it in the next video, but in short, salaries in Singapore are increasing as well, and they are mandated by the government. So all these fixed costs are increasing. Okay, variable costs obviously increasing because all your raw materials and all that, they are all increasing as well. So that's why, right, when companies are faced with all these kinds of situations, the government stepped in to help them, right, through all the immediate measures that I said earlier. Okay, so the tax rebates would help to lower the impact of the inflation on these firms and manage their costs, right? And flexibility in financing options, i.e. the loans, right, will make sure that these firms can stay sustainable. Okay, so this can help maintain jobs, right? While at the same time, you know, because of where is it? This bit here, extension of skills future enterprise credit by a year. Okay, what that does is that it incentivizes further human development, so R&D, right? And that would overall improve the productive efficiency of all these firms. As for the consumers themselves, if firms can manage their costs, then the costs of all these goods and services they have already increased, and it's inevitable that they would increase, you know, because, or rather I should say, it will never go back to the prices of the old days because, well, GST, right, as well as all the inflation that has already occurred. So the consumers can benefit from that because if costs on the supply side are managed, right, then the prices won't increase. Because typically, and this one I guess is not really economics, but well, I guess it is, when costs of production, right, or total costs keep it simple, when total costs increase, firms typically offload all these additional costs onto the consumers. Okay, why? Because firms aim to maximize their profits, right? So over here, okay, if consumers can benefit from that, and not only that, you know, all the CDC voucher top-ups and all that, all the transfer payments, they directly help increase the disposable income of all the consumers. And so overall, this would help somewhat to improve some allocative efficiency, okay, as well as improving distributive efficiency to achieve greater equity, right? Because that's one of the microeconomic goals of a government, correct? And in this particular case, it would help improve price stability, which is one of the macroeconomic goals. Okay, so essentially what you can see here, right, is all your economic concepts are at work. Okay, why is it that the government would do all these things, and with one policy measure, how much impact that can possibly have, right? Be it from a microeconomic or macroeconomic perspective. Okay, so yeah. Okay, now moving on to this pursuit of economic growth. Okay, essentially within the budget itself, Lawrence Wong mentioned that the government makes no apologies for pursuing growth. You know, in order to refute, I guess, arguments that say that, you know, hey, Singapore don't need to grow so slowly, right? Yeah. So to put things in a little bit of context, I think last year, or was it 2022? I can't remember. We experienced a GDP growth of about 1.1%. Not bad, not good. Okay? Chernobyl. So, the policies to try and pursue further economic growth here, right? According to this budget statement, the first thing is the introduction of this thing called refundable investment credit, right? In short, there are tax credits or rebates, I guess, for companies that invest in expansion of certain infrastructure, right? So manufacturing facilities and in R&D. Not only that, the government is topping up the National Productivity Fund by $2 billion. So what is this? It provides, as you can see here, financial support and incentives for initiatives that improve productivity and help continuing education of workers. You'll see this common theme run throughout this entire budget statement. There's a lot of emphasis on, you know, investments into R&D and development of human capital. Okay? So that's the first thing, right? This is a new thing that they are introducing. Now we can look at the enhancements between all the different sectors, right? Well, I mean, in this particular case, Lawrence Wong, he mentioned that, you know, these are policy measures meant to build on the strengths that we currently have. So certain sectors that are our, you know, main bread and butter, I guess, things that, you know, would give us a comparative advantage, you know, relative to other countries, right? So further investment of $3 billion into a RIE 2025 plan. This is sort of like a 5-year plan, you know, because the previous one was from 2015 to 2020, right? But essentially, ever since we started this transition into a knowledge-based economy from 1997, I believe, Singapore has always invested in research, innovation, and enterprise already. Alright, so yeah, the government is investing further $3 billion. And of course, top up of the Financial Sector Development Fund by $2 billion. What this does, or rather what this fund does, is that it provides grants to firms for development of skills, infrastructure, so on and so forth. Subsidies, in short. Okay? And of course, other digital infrastructural investments. So $1 billion into, you know, things like AI and into the national broadband network, you know, to increase all the internet speeds and what have you. So, not only that, okay, the government also announced further local SME support. So in this particular case, okay, number one, Lawrence Wong is intending to enhance the pact, right? So partnerships for capability transformation. What is this? It is basically a policy measure that is seeking to, you know, support improvements in productivity, enhance knowledge transfers between the MNCs and the SMEs, right? You know, support joint projects between local SMEs and MNCs as well, right? So they're going to expand this and go into things like, expand the partnership between the SMEs and MNCs into things like training, corporate ventures, so startups, and going global, so internationalization, like going into other markets essentially. That's the first one. Second one, for support for local SMEs, extending enhanced support for loans for green transformation and sustainability under the enterprise financing scheme. Okay, I think we did talk about this in the very first part in the immediate measures. All right. What that means is that under the EFS, all the loans that are given out are, that would help firms go green, right? So fundamentally transform their processes or, certain usage of certain equipment, their energy sources even, I guess, although that one is quite unfeasible at the moment. Yeah, they are going to enhance the support there. And finally, expansion of the energy efficiency grant. So this one is quite interesting because it was introduced only 2 years ago, right? And it was mainly targeting F&B companies. So in every part of the F&B supply chain, right? So the government, when this was first introduced, they would co-fund investments in energy efficient equipment for all these companies in this particular sector. But now they are going to expand it to include manufacturing, construction, data centers, that one is a big one, and maritime sectors. So in case you don't know, data centers use how do I put this nicely, pardon my French, a shit ton of energy and water. Yeah, because you have to keep all those servers cool, right? So they have a lot of, obviously I don't know the engineering behind it, right? If not, I'll be working there already. The usage of all these things to keep all the data centers cool, right? So it's not that green. That's why, as we improve our digital infrastructure, inevitably there will be more data centers and expansion of data centers. But that also comes with certain negative externalities, such as the impacts on the environment. So that's why, to mitigate that as much as possible, the energy efficiency grant is meant to, help them go green. Now, economic growth, this time from the H2 history analysis. So that means, right, I'm going to be using H2 history concepts in this particular part to explain all these things. It may seem strange that I'm using the historical perspective here, but for H2 history students, y'all would learn eventually, be it whether you are J1 or J2, the concept of the political economy in Southeast Asian, or not even Southeast Asia, just East Asian and Southeast Asian economic transformations. So we are talking about Japan, China, and of course all the SEA countries, right? Even for those who are still taking the old syllabus 9752, we are also referring to nations like South Korea and not a nation, Taiwan. Okay, so the concept of the political economy, right, and I guess this may interest H2 Econs students as well, is that the government would influence economic development through the usage of certain laws, policies, and institutions. So in the case of Singapore, we are looking at institutions like MAS, our central bank, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Economic Development Board, Ministry of Finance, so on and so forth. Other examples for the H2 history students include Jurong Town Corporation and DBS, right? Development Bank of Singapore, or at least that's what it was known as when it was first founded. Yeah, so you can see that occurring here as well, right? That style of governance has yet to change, and I doubt it will. Development of sectors also. So you would learn in your H2 history that there was an emphasis on EOI from the very beginning, export-oriented industrialization, and a focus on manufacturing at first, right? And specifically manufacturing of electronic products and so on and so forth. one of which is the semiconductor industry. So I guess this applies to GP as well. For any students watching this, it may interest you to know that actually Singapore has quite a robust semiconductor industry here. The only thing is that we carved out a niche in this particular industry, because the big players obviously will be countries like Japan, South Korea, and not a country, Taiwan. So East Asian economies essentially, right? So y'all would learn, right, depending on, for the J2 students watching this, depending on how far your teacher has gotten, you all will learn that we eventually transition to heavy chemicals industries, right? So that's where the development of Jurong Island came up, and then 1997 a shift towards a knowledge-based economy. So if you all look at that timeline, okay, and assess the change and continuity there, that's how you can, sort of like think about it conceptually, right? Focus on manufacturing at the beginning, so 1960s to about 70s, then pivot to HCI about the 80s, and then knowledge-based 90s. But throughout this whole time, we were developing our finance sector, okay, to create a financial hub in this country, right? And of course, at the point of time, Hong Kong was still the biggest player. At this current moment, if I'm not wrong, we are the biggest player now in Asia, or at least one of the biggest players, certainly. Okay, so we can see here also the focus on EOI, export-oriented industrialization, right? Development of all these SMEs for the sake of exporting all these goods, internationalization, corporate venturing, all those things I mentioned. And of course, finally, a pivot towards the national unity topic. So y'all learned about ideologies underpinning national unity, right? And in the case of Singapore, you also learned, at least from the 60s, 1965 lah, all the way until the 1991 or 92, right? We didn't have a codified ideology per se, but it has been described as economic pragmatism by historians. The idea being that, actually, as its name suggests, pragmatic about all these economic policies and economic growth and all that. And even though we officially have shifted away from that ideology, officially, right? Things like 5 shared values, and then the whole idea of the Forward Singapore Social Compact that was introduced a couple of years ago, right? That idea of economic pragmatism still underpins much of our policies today. So if you want to know how to explain how economic pragmatism can create national unity, right? The idea still applies today, which is that the pursuit of growth underpins national unity since it provides the nation with that common goal. And that common goal being economic growth, right? So it binds the citizens together. I mean, of course, on top of all the other multiculturalism policies, but yeah. Okay, so that's the H2 analysis here. Alright. Next one, GP analysis. Okay. So there's quite a lot to mine here again. First things first, the economic analysis sort of things, right? Necessary investments into R&D to develop human capital, right? The idea is that it places the onus on companies to develop their human capital because the government has already paved the way to do that. And once again, constantly think about that concept that I talked about earlier, which is governments take care of long and short-term needs, right? Part of it is economic development, okay? And the reason for this really is that we are a nation with zero natural resources and an open economy, right? Or rather, the open economy is a result of zero natural resources. So part of economic pragmatism was developing this, or rather developing policies to mitigate this particular problem, okay? So because of that, we want to make sure that our population also would be able to continue working even as we grow older. That in itself comes with a slew of social issues, but let's not get into that yet. But at the same time, all the investments, right, in research, innovation, training, so on and so forth, right, lifelong learning, all that, really what it does is that it can also help attract a lot of talent into Singapore to offset the aging population. All right. Now, from a technological perspective, specific to AI, and of course, the investments into the digital infrastructure, these investments help us stay competitive, right? And then, of course, technology and science, it pushes the boundaries of our human knowledge and the physical capabilities of human beings. And this would help us as well, when it comes to things like big data analysis and so on and so forth, right? And improves the overall efficiency in the economy. We'll talk more about this when we go into the H2 Econs analysis. Not only that, we can look at it from an environmental perspective as well, because obviously there was a lot of mentions of green, tech or green sort of like sustainability investments and what have yous. Okay, the thing is that environmental problems are existential transnational threats. It does not see borders, and when the environment is screwed, we are screwed as a species, as a whole, right? And okay, we don't have time to really delve into the impacts of, let's say, global warming, because oh my god, we're already at 50 minutes. Yeah, we don't have time to go into that, but in short, yeah, it's an existential threat. So investments in green tech research and expansion of funding for all these green transitions is absolutely necessary. All right, because it helps us, collectively contribute to the collective efforts or lack thereof to deal with all these, or to mitigate or prevent all these potentially disastrous, environmental impacts, that comes from environmental degradation. And then, of course, political analysis, right? We talked about PACT earlier. It helps the government balance the benefits against the cons of having MNCs. The idea being that MNCs come in, extract all the value. If let's say there's no government, if there are no government regulations, if I were running that business, I'll do the same. I'll come in here, extract all the value I can from the economy, right, and not create jobs for the locals. I'll just get whatever talents that I believe best fit the job that I'm offering from overseas sources. Okay, by the way, that's what the Europeans did to all the Southeast Asian countries, and that set the context for your H2 history economic development analysis. But yeah, let's not get into that here. All right, and so what that means is that locals will be able to benefit from all these FDIs that are coming in, foreign direct investments. Okay, not just in terms of having jobs, but also entrepreneurship, because they can start all these SMEs and then create opportunities or capitalize on all these opportunities for themselves to create a viable B2B business to business kind of offering. Okay, at the same time, it also mitigates anti-globalization sentiments. Why? Because it manages the social tensions that may potentially come from this. If the government is mandating that there be deeper partnerships between MNCs and SMEs, that means your local SMEs will benefit more, which also means local workers will benefit more, right? And so that will manage that, because then now, if we, in GP, typically you'll see like, globalization brings more benefits than harms, or vice versa, right? And the typical thesis would be something like, it brings benefits, it brings both benefits and harms, but we can limit the harms as much as possible. This is what I mean. Okay, so governments can mitigate that by ensuring that we reap as much benefits as possible while mitigating the harms as much as possible. All right, and this also builds better foreign relations because the countries from which all these firms come, all right, they will appreciate, like, hey, you know, it is a collaborative effort, right? We can extract value, you can gain value also, win-win. Okay, so yeah, that's the GP analysis for this particular part. And finally, the economics analysis. Okay, so the AI and digital infrastructure investments, this obviously will improve productive efficiency, right? Because the usage of AI, okay, if we look at it really into the micro details, it can be used to, you know, improve processes. Let's say like big data analysis, right? Or, you know, predictions of, you know, if let's say we're talking about the finance sector, predictions of certain trends or what have you, all right, based on prevailing information. And of course other forms of AI. I'm not an expert in that field, so I'm not going to presume to know more than that. And of course, broadband network, improved internet speeds, that would, I mean, that will obviously improve the efficiency, right? The productivity, because things are just lightning fast. Now, of course, the worry here is that this may lead to structural unemployment, because inevitably when you invest in new technology, right, as you learn in economics, it more often than not leads to structural employment because certain jobs are made obsolete. So if we look at real life examples, okay, ATM for instance, automated teller machine, right? So bank tellers in the past, okay, that used to be a job because if people, let's say, needed to withdraw money from their personal bank accounts, they would have to go to the bank, go and speak to a teller, and then execute the paperwork from that. Now you just put your bank card in, type your PIN, and then you can withdraw your money. So because we are using that particular machine, right, and this technology obviously is not new anymore, but this is just to prove a point, the advent of that machine led to the death of that one job. As a result, all those workers will get inevitably laid off. So because investments into all this digital infrastructure can improve the efficiency of the firms, right, it can also fundamentally cause certain jobs to become obsolete. Which is why, to deal with this particular problem, the government would invest in the incentivizing, you know, the development of human capital, right, so that we can create a workforce that is adaptable to all these changes. And that's where all your other policies would come in, things like Skills Future, things like, you know, actually Skills Future, the main one, and of course all the other National Productivity Fund and enterprise financing schemes and all that. So yeah, speaking of which, government intervention, right? So all these things that the government is doing is essentially a form of subsidies, right? So it will lower the discretionary costs for firms, because investments into R&D is entirely their own choice, and more often than not, right, depending on the market structure, of course, you know, let's say you have a monopolistic competition kind of structure, okay, why would firms go and invest in R&D, right? Less of fewer availability of substitutes. So even then, investments into R&D would also present a huge opportunity cost for all these firms, right? Because they will forego the next best alternative. So in providing all these subsidies, the firms get more resources, then they can spend on R&D, or at least that's the idea, right? At the same time, the enhancement of PACT, so the partnership and transformation, capability transformation, right, the partnerships between the SMEs and the MNCs. What this does, because we are, once again, just to give you a quick reminder here, right? So support partnerships between SMEs and MNCs in more areas like trading, corporate ventures, and going global, internationalization. What this does is that it removes, or at the very least, it doesn't remove, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It helps all these firms overcome all these barriers to entry. Okay, and by barriers of entry, I don't mean barriers of entry in the protectionist sense. I mean the startup, costs that are required to venture into global operations, right? Because that shit is expensive, obviously, right? At the same time, in enhancing the partnerships between the MNCs and SMEs in going international, that can also give the SMEs some access to economies of scale that may be enjoyed by the MNCs themselves. Then that lowers your, marginal costs of production, right? Of course, next thing, environmental investments. Okay, that reduces deadweight loss incurred, from negative externalities produced by pollution, which comes in the form of pollution. Okay, so change to green tech. Yes, that may possibly produce more negative externalities. We don't know yet, right? But in this particular case, transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels, that reduces that deadweight loss that's created from environmental pollution. And of course, the macroeconomic benefits here, right? As I said earlier, all these schemes would incentivize further FDI inflows. Okay, so tax credits would entice foreign direct investments. Okay, we can remain competitive in the global economy, and when the FDIs come in, right, depending on what kind of investments that a company undertakes, that can still create jobs, be it through the FDIs themselves or even the SME growth that is done through PACT, and then overall GDP growth increases, right? So yeah, that's the economics analysis here for all these economic growth measures as underlined within this budget statement. And finally, the last bit for this video, we are gonna have to do the rest in parts, right? Because we are already an hour in, and yeah, we have limited time as well. Fiscal policy overview. Now, to be more specific, right, in this particular case, we're only looking at the taxation side of things, because government spending, some of it has already been covered in the previous parts of this video, right? And of course, more government spending would come, but in the form of social policies and all that, which we would cover in a separate video. Okay, so tax changes here, right? All the tax policies that were implemented for this particular budget. Okay, personal income tax rebates of 50%. All right, what that means in short is that for the year of assessment 2024, if let's say I pay $2,000 in personal income tax, I'll get back $1,000. All right. Of course, that's capped at 200%. Okay. So, sorry, I just realized I made a mistake. It's not capped at 200%. It's capped at $200. Capped at $200. So if I pay $1,000 in income tax, I get back $200. Right? Because 50% of $1,000 is 500. So yeah, this essentially is meant to target, once again, your lower income families. Right? So to continue from here, dependent tax reliefs income threshold increased to $8,000. Now the thing here is that when we talk about all these dependent tax reliefs, right, there are various schemes. I would recommend you go on to IRA's website and go and check it out. But if let's say, for instance, one example would be the parent relief or handicapped parent relief, right? The idea is that if let's say you are living with a dependent, someone who's essentially somewhat dependent on you, right, for their living expenses. To be clear, dependent is the noun. That means someone who depends on someone else. And then dependent, D-E-N-T, is the verb. Okay? Or rather, adjective in this particular case. So, for the parents and handicapped parents one, for instance, if let's say they are above 55 years of age, right, and this information can be found in IRAS's website, and if let's say they do not have an annual income of more than $4,000, right, so effectively anybody who's not working, okay, and living in the same household as you, and you or living in a separate household but you incur $2,000 or more in supporting them, then you might be eligible for certain parent tax relief. So the thing is that the income threshold is set at $4,000 previously, right? Annual income. Now it has been increased to $8,000. So what that promotes, in short, is a greater, okay, I don't think I have this in one of my slides, but what that promotes, in short, is greater sort of familial cohesion. It incentivizes people to take care of their parents, right? Or in the case of handicapped spouses or what have you, right? There are various schemes on IRAS. Go and check that out. Okay. The next thing, adjustments of the property tax annual value band. Alright, so lower threshold increase from 8,000 to 12,000 and upper thresholds increase from 100 to 140k. So I explained what the property tax annual value is earlier, right? So essentially the estimation of your property in terms of like the potential monthly rental income, then you times 12 for the entire year, right? So property tax, okay, previously, right, they made an adjustment to it already last year, but by they I mean the government, but because property prices were skyrocketing for the past couple of years, so they adjusted this particular band here such that it accommodates more lower to middle income families, right, in terms of like the houses in which they stay, right? So that for those families that stay in houses, okay, that live in houses that have an annual value of below 12,000, for instance, then they will pay for lower property taxes, or sometimes they don't pay property tax at all. Okay, so yeah, essentially once again you see it's targeted more towards lower and middle income families. ABSD adjustments. Now, additional buyer stamp duties. This is a tax on additional properties that you will purchase. Alright, so the idea here is that they will extend the ABSD refund on their replacement private property for single Singaporeans aged 55 and above. Alright, I'll explain more about the impacts later on, but the idea is that if let's say I have a property, right, and I want to upgrade to another property, I would purchase that new one first, alright? But it's not as though I can immediately move in, right? Because maybe sometimes I want to do some renovations or what have you. So the problem is that I already have a property under my own name, alright? That means that in purchasing the second property, before I can sell my first one, I still have to pay the additional buyer's stamp duty. But if let's say you want to sell that first house, right, or rather if you're going to sell that first house, then you can request or put in an application for an ABSD refund. Now previously it was only limited, I think, to married couples, yeah, but now it has been extended to include single Singaporeans aged 55 and above. Alright, so that means this include like widowed people and so on and so forth, or just single people in general. Okay, and finally, the last thing for the ABSD adjustment is the clawback rates for developers. It has been reduced to 90%. In short, what this means, all right, I'm simplifying it a lot here, okay, is that previously, if developers want to reclaim the ABSD that they paid on the houses that they are developing, they would have to sell 100% of the houses first, right? So that means they build, let's say, a condominium. They have to sell all the units, then they can make a claim for the ABSD refund, right? But it has been reduced to 90%. That means even if they sell only 90% of the house, they can reclaim some, not all, some of their ABSD. Alright? Now the next part here, this is the really technical bit, so please bear with me. The next part here is the implementation of the BEPS framework, or specifically the second pillar of the BEPS framework. Alright, what is this? I would recommend you to go and check it out, go and read more on it, but short of it is that this framework here is meant to help ensure, or rather prevent as much as possible, tax avoidance by MNCs. So the thing is that MNCs, they found a loophole in the past, well, decades, right, in that they would set up certain operations in certain tax havens, so countries where maybe they don't have as high a corporate tax, or they may not, or they may even give tax incentives for all these companies to come in and set up their base there, and as a result they don't pay their taxes there, and then they can shift their profits from all the between all these jurisdictions, right, or between all these countries or economies, okay, so that they don't have to pay corporate taxes. Alright, so this thing was researched in 2013. I only just found out about it when I was researching all the bits for this budget video. Very interesting. Yeah, essentially it's meant to help manage some of the global inequality that's going on right now, okay. And there are two main measures here. The first one, income inclusion rule, right? Essentially, MNCs with parent companies in Singapore, right, they have to pay 15% corporate tax on their overseas profits. Yeah. And to be implemented at the same time, which is from next year, 1st January 2025, collection of any taxes below the effective 15% corporate tax on profits made by MNCs in Singapore locally. Okay, so that's the one of the major changes in our tax policies. Alright, so the analysis here, quick H2 history trivia. The OECD, right, which did the study on the BEPS framework, the base erosion and profit shifting framework, is the successor of the OEEC, right, which was created in 1948 to administer the $40 million Marshall Aid. So yeah, this is for global economy, right? And we already talked about that in our Telegram video. Go check that out if you have yet to check that out, or you know, hey, join our Telegram channel and you get access to all these Telegram exclusives. Alright, now from the general paper analysis. First things first, from the social issues perspective, tax rebates and adjustments of bands of property tax would mitigate inequality. Yeah, English teacher correcting his own grammar. Mitigate, not mitigates, subject verb agreement. Alright, so the thing is that when all these tax rebates and the bands of property tax are adjusted, right, as I said earlier, it is meant to help the lower middle income families more, okay? And the dependence income threshold, all these changes will provide more security for families who have to support certain loved ones who may, for one reason or another, be unable to support themselves. So it helps manage mental health issues, right, by taking a little bit of the pressure off. And of course, you know, as I said earlier, I didn't put it in these slides here, right? It also enhances the nuclear family in Singapore. Okay? It enhances the nuclear family in Singapore. And the economics analysis in the context of GP, once again, right? This ensures greater social mobility. Why? Because now more people are able to upgrade their homes, okay, because of the adjustments to the ABSD. Developers have more incentives to develop more properties, right, to increase property supply. Because previously, there is a link there, you can go and check it out. Not here, this one, right? Many developers responded to this policy change, and they said, hey, now we don't need to worry too much, or at least we take on less risk, right? Because now they don't have to develop something and ensure 100% sales rate, right? And of course, the BEPS taxation, it holds MNCs accountable for taxes, and then the government will have increased revenue to spend on policies that will improve the society as a whole. That's for the GP analysis. Now for the economics analysis, okay? The BEPS taxation, it helps increase government revenues, right? Which would help Singapore achieve a more balanced budget. So typically, if Singapore can help it, we would always try and go for a budget surplus. And I think I explained that in the Explaining Singapore's Past Reserves video. The idea being that we want to, add on to our government coffers as much as we can, especially after the huge amount that we drew down due to the COVID spending, right? So as I said here, helps in building of the reserves to hedge against future potential crises, okay? So that we have the ability to utilize fiscal measures in the future without having to go into debt. Tax rebates, same thing, again, ensures more disposable income for 2024, right? And it reduces the deadweight taxation loss from the GST increase. So, I briefly explained the deadweight taxation loss earlier, right? But the idea is that the personal income tax rebates, okay, since we pay more for the VAT, right, value added tax or goods and services tax as we call it here, the personal income tax rebates will ensure that, hey, we get back all this money, right? More disposable income, higher disposable income. The assumption, as you learn in economics, is that consumers would purchase or rather consume goods and services to improve their standards of living. So that would help to mitigate the deadweight taxation loss here, right? And of course, ABSD adjustments, it improves equity, microeconomic goal in society, while providing more flexibility for developers so they can better manage their opportunity costs. It's as simple as that. All right. So we have thus far spent an hour and 20 minutes breaking down just, the first three parts of the budget statement. What I would say though, if let's say you want to know which one is really the most important part, and in editing this video I'll put timestamps below so that you can easily go to whichever part of the explanation that I'm talking about. I'll say this one is the most important thing, most important example to go and remember, right? Because not just for econs but general paper as well, because for general paper this is the government directly taking action to help the people. For econs this is fiscal policy at work, actual example of fiscal policy, right? Don't know if that will help for your CSQ, I presume it would. And then in terms of the actual pursuit of economic growth, I would say the most important ones to take note of, it depends on what you want to go and remember. That's up to you, right? But I would say definitely, out of everything that we have covered so far, this would be the most important example to go and remember. All right. So that will be it for this part. We have already gone over by, oh my god, yeah. For the other policy measures as announced in this budget statement, we would come up with a different more videos for it. Okay, so yeah, you know, you can listen to this as you do whatever you need to do, right? So if you have found this useful, please share it with your friends. Okay, for the especially for students who are watching this, all right, if you have a question, please feel free to, you know, submit a question here, right, on any of these things, or it can be things related to H2 history, general paper, economics. I'll try. Certainly O levels English as well. Yeah, or you know, if you'd just like to have a discussion, you know, please feel free to use this link to submit a question. If you are looking for, you know, further help in your studies, okay, especially when it comes to general paper or H2 history, seriously considering offering Econs tuition now, but let me go and think about it. Yeah, please feel free to call us at this number, or to find out more information, visit our website. This should be A levels, that's a typo. Yeah, or even, you know, O levels English, right? If you like further help with that, we do offer free trial lessons. They are totally free, zero strings attached. We won't even charge you for it if, let's say, you choose to sign on for a longer term with us. And of course, finally, please, you know, if you haven't done so, please join our Telegram channel. That's where we upload all the content for students. So things like essay outlines, all these kinds of slides, so on and so forth. Okay. In fact, if you want these slides, please join the Telegram channel. I don't think I'm gonna put it in a Google Drive link anymore. So yeah, yeah, until part 2, right? Costume change first. All right. So we'll see you guys at next part of this series.